Francisco Franco ruled Spain with an iron grip for almost 40 years. During his time as El Caudillo, the right-wing dictator massacred his fellow countrymen, tried to exterminate cultural minorities, and did everything he could to stamp out Spanish democracy. He was a man whose actions inspired the confidence of Adolf Hitler and the horror of Pablo Picasso, who immortalized Franco's crimes in his own artwork. Today, on A Day in History, we look at the unspeakable things Francisco Franco did to his country. Fortunately, you don't have to be Franco to carve your own path to power, thanks to today's video sponsor, Rise of Kingdoms. Rise of Kingdoms is an epic strategy game available on PC and mobile, where you lead your civilization through history alongside over 60 million other players. Pick from one of 14 historical civilizations, each one with their own bonuses and units, so you can play while learning a bit about history's greatest civilizations. Try your own hand at Spain and set out to battle with their famous conquistadors, or march your legions across the world for the glory of Rome. You can put these troops to the test in real-time battles across the game's seamless world map. Spot a neighbor being attacked? Rush to help them, or use the opportunity to make your own attacks. But don't forget to take advantage of the game's alliance system, which lets you team up with other players in team battles and tackle special events like the Ark of Osiris, a massive 30 versus 30 battle that'll put your strategy skills to the test. There's never been a better time to join, since they're about to add the Greek civilization with Alexander's legendary Agiraspides, so you can experience a whole new approach to the game. To celebrate, there'll also be a special event where players from each different civilization come together to compete and earn special prizes, including the Apple Vision Pro. Click out the first link in the description to download Rise of Kingdoms, or scan the on-screen QR code to download Rise of Kingdoms. It's available on PC and mobile, so you can play however you prefer. Wherever you play, kickstart your kingdom story with 20 free silver keys by using the promo code GREASE4ROK for new players. And don't forget to follow the second link to join the Civilization Clash event, where you'll fight valiantly for the honor of your civilization. Thank you to Rise of Kingdoms for sponsoring this video. The early years. Francisco Franco y Bahamonde was born in El Ferrol, Spain, on December 4th, 1892. His father's military background and his mother's devout Catholicism shaped the young Franco into a hardline traditionalist. And after an uneventful childhood, he entered a military school and progressed into the army. Despite a lackluster performance in the academy, Franco proved to be an incredible soldier in the field. He spent over a decade fighting in Morocco, where he soared up the ranks, becoming Spain's youngest captain, major, and then general in 1926. He was admired for his bravery and personal discipline that earned him the respect of his men and others in the military establishment. Franco settled into the command of Zaragoza General Military Academy and spent several years quietly teaching the next generation of Spanish officers. But events were transpiring that would lead Franco down a very different path. In April 1931, King Alfonso XIII of Spain was deposed by elections and a new left-wing Republican government took power. The Republican government closed Franco's academy and reassigned him to an insignificant post to get him out of the way. Across Spain, Catholic schools and charities were closed down, Catholic orders like the Jesuits were outlawed, and priests were imprisoned and sometimes killed by spontaneous left-wing violence. Things got so bad that Pope Pius XI publicly denounced Spain for its oppression of the church. Cuts to the military were one thing, but these attacks of Catholicism infuriated many Spaniards like Franco. But he kept his head down and obeyed his orders for the time being. Spanish voters made their opposition clear in 1933 when they voted a right-wing coalition into power. However, the existing government blocked the right-wing parties from entering government for over a year. Soon after, socialist and communist militias staged insurrections to prevent a right-wing takeover of the country. The worst of these was in Asturias, where labor unions rose up and killed dozens of people, including priests, businessmen, and soldiers in October 1934. The government needed someone to deal with them. They needed Franco. Franco was given command and sent troops from Morocco north to crush the rebels. Franco described the suppression of the revolt as a war against socialism and communism, and came to believe that an international Jewish communist conspiracy was ultimately behind it. Franco clung to this belief for the rest of his life, and, much like Hitler, saw his left-wing opponents as pawns in a global political scheme by powerful foreign interests. Within 2 weeks, the rebellion had been crushed, and 2,000 people were dead. The revolt only deepened political divisions and encouraged more political violence. When another election was held in 1936, mob violence and voter intimidation made the results impossible to trust. Although a left-wing government formed, historians cannot agree on who actually won, and many on the right believed it had been stolen. Fearing a new wave of persecution and left-wing political reforms, a group of military leaders began planning a coup. Franco was once again sidelined to an unimportant post on the Canary Islands, but he was still hesitant to support the coup. It took a few months and a series of high-profile assassinations on both sides to finally persuade him that something had to be done. Franco and a group of other military leaders decided that they would rise up on the 18th of July 1936 and impose their own nationalist regime. The coup began a day early on the 17th of July, when Spanish forces in Morocco rebelled against their Republican commanders. Across Spain, other officers and military units similarly announced their opposition to the government. Franco released a manifesto explaining his reasons for joining the coup. He called out the violence, persecution, and chaos that had gripped Spain for years and promised a return to justice, liberty, and equality. He promised to wage war without quarter upon political manipulators who deceive the honest worker, and against foreigners and foreign sympathizers who, either openly or by deceit, are trying to destroy Spain. Franco flew to Morocco and assumed full control of the rebellious troops. One of his first acts was to execute 200 Republican officers and officials that the soldiers had detained. Franco framed them as necessary executions of criminals in wartime, and they would merely be the first of thousands of Republicans to face Franco's firing squads. Soon after, Franco sent his forces back to the Spanish mainland, and the war began in earnest. Although the nationalists had military superiority, they needed more supplies and manpower to improve their odds, so Franco turned to fellow militaristic and nationalist governments in Germany and Italy. Franco negotiated aid in the form of weapons, planes, vehicles, and some limited manpower to support the war effort, while Hitler and Mussolini saw the war as a way to destabilize the Mediterranean and uplift another potential ally. Franco's ability to negotiate support from abroad, his successful military career, and his unblemished public persona led the other nationalists to make him the head of the Provisional Nationalist Government and Generalissimo of all their armed forces in autumn 1936. Franco's pragmatic nationalism didn't pledge allegiance to fascism or monarchism, but his respect for tradition and the military, along with his strong Catholic faith and anti-communist beliefs, were popular with a wide range of people. He managed to consolidate the military, Catholics, fascists, monarchists, landowners, and more into a coalition that would endure for decades in the Falange Española Tradicionalista, FET, movement. The war saw atrocities on both sides. Republicans and nationalists killed civilians, massacred surrendering soldiers, and inflicted terrible suffering on the people of Spain. Historians call the campaign of Republican atrocities the Red Terror, and the nationalists' ones the White Terror. While both killed tens of thousands, most historians agree that Franco's White Terror before and after the war killed many more people. One of the earliest and most famous episodes of his White Terror was the massacre in Badajoz in August 1936. After a bitter fight for the town, Franco's forces rounded up Republican prisoners and civilian sympathizers in the city's bullring and opened fire on them with machine guns. At least 500 people were killed, possibly up to 2,000. The officer in charge, Juan Yague, earned the nickname the Butcher of Badajoz and went on to serve as Franco's Minister of the Air. But by far the most famous atrocity of the war was the bombing of Guernica on the 26th of April, 1937. Guernica was used as a communication hub for the Republicans, and Franco wanted it gone. On Franco's orders, Luftwaffe Condor Legion and Italian bombers unleashed a devastating aerial bombardment on the city, targeting everyone and everything. Of the hundreds who died, most were civilians. The bombing horrified the rest of the world, and it was immortalized in Pablo Picasso's harrowing painting in 1937. Aerial bombardments and systemic massacres supported Franco's successful campaign through Spain. By 1937, his forces had conquered Republican strongholds in the Basque region and Asturias, and by 1938, almost all of Spain was under his control. Barcelona surrendered in January 1939, and Madrid, the last Republican holdout, fell in March 1939. On April 1st, Franco declared victory and began his reign as El Caudillo of his new authoritarian right-wing regime. One historian called Franco's regime the most purely arbitrary regime in the world, and said that Franco had more practical power in Spain than Hitler or Stalin did in their countries. Franco used this power to pursue a vision of a self-sufficient, militaristic, and thoroughly Catholic Spain. One of the first acts of his government was the law of political responsibilities. This ensured that all Republican fighters and sympathizers could still be punished for opposing Franco at any point. The war was over, but tens of thousands of Republicans faced jail cells, rigged courts, and firing squads as Franco settled the score with his old enemies. Franco cracked down on all other forms of opposition by banning trade unions, abolishing political parties, and censoring virtually all media that wasn't under nationalist control. There was no way to organize effective resistance to his regime or even criticize Franco without ending up in a jail cell. By the mid-1940s, Franco claimed to have over 26,000 political prisoners locked up, but the actual number was certainly higher, and obviously doesn't count those he had already killed. The deaths of countless Republicans left orphans that Franco's regime placed into Catholic orphanages or with state-approved families. No one knows exactly how many children were moved around like this, but there could have been hundreds of thousands of these so-called lost children of Francoism. Another target were the Basque and Catalan peoples. Not only had they been Republican strongholds, Franco's Spain had no room for these smaller, divergent regional identities which challenged his nationalist vision. Language is power, so Franco did everything he could to stamp it out. Using Basque or Catalan languages outside of the home was made illegal, and all official documents would only be printed in Spanish. It was even illegal to give your child a Basque or Catalan name. Meanwhile, Franco went all in on Catholicism. He made it the official state religion and banned public celebration of non-Catholic holidays. Franco gutted the secular education system and purged non-Catholic teachers to replace it with a thoroughly Catholic curriculum that spread the church's values. Franco's Catholic ideas also drove other aspects of social policy, such as outright bans on divorce, contraception, and abortion, and restrictions on women's working rights. Despite his past alliance with Hitler and Mussolini, Franco never joined the Second World War. Spain was too weak from the Civil War to jump into the fight on any side. Franco did discuss the possibility of an alliance with Hitler in October 1940, but Franco's demands of territory and support were too high and Hitler refused. The negotiations were so sour that Hitler said he would rather have 3 or 4 teeth pulled out than negotiate with Franco again. Following Hitler's invasion of the USSR in 1941, Franco also permitted 50,000 Spanish volunteers to join the German offensive, but they went without official Spanish military support. Franco's closer relationship with the Axis didn't alienate the Allies either. Churchill publicly thanked Franco for his neutrality, especially for not allowing German soldiers to move troops through Spain. Later, During the Allied invasion of North Africa, Allied airmen were often forced to land in Spain, where Franco's troops treated them well with medical aid, fuel to take off again, and help to get out of Spain and back to the fight. Many questions have been asked about Franco's role in the Holocaust. Franco's Spain never deported Jews to concentration camps and never allowed the Nazis to round up Spain's Jews. Spain was one of the only safe refuges for Jews in mainland Europe, and tens of thousands of them, especially from France, escaped the Holocaust by fleeing there. Across Europe, men like Eduardo Proper de Callejon, a secretary at the Spanish embassy in Bordeaux, helped give 30,000 Jews travel visas to enter Spain, while Ángel Sanz-Briz in the Spanish embassy in Budapest gave over 5,000 Jews Spanish passports. After the war, Franco's regime tried to claim that it had been a savior of Jews, but the reality was different. Many Spaniards did help Jews, but Franco was never one of them. When his regime learned that Callejon was helping Jews in Bordeaux, they reassigned him to avoid a diplomatic incident with the new Vichy French government. But there was something even more sinister going on under the surface. In 1941, Franco secretly ordered provincial governors to make records of every Jew in Spain. Some historians believe Franco intended to use it as a bargaining chip with the Nazis, while others suggested that Franco's regime actually completed it and handed it over to the SS in secret. We can't be sure because Franco's regime destroyed nearly all records relating to it to remove all evidence of their involvement and cast themselves as a savior of Jews during the Holocaust. Neutrality saved Spain from destruction, but it did not earn them any friends. After the war, Spain's neutrality left it diplomatically and economically isolated, and Franco was described as the most unpopular statesman in Europe. This unpopularity might be what inspired the unexpected twist that came after the war. Franco started to change. Nearly all of the executions, imprisonments, and other abuses occurred during the Civil War or in the early stages of the regime, but they had all but stopped by the 1950s. Even Franco's fiercest critics acknowledged that he became much more restrained. One sign of this was a 1947 referendum regarding the monarchy. Franco allowed voters to decide whether Spain would become a monarchy after his death, which they ultimately supported. Franco obeyed the vote and made provisions for a king, Alfonso XII's grandson, Juan Carlos, to take power after his death. Franco never softened his anti-communist stance, but this worked in his favor as the Cold War ramped up. The United States decided that Spain was more useful as an ally, and in 1953, Franco gave them permission to set up air and naval bases in Spain. These closer ties with the capitalist countries encouraged Franco to loosen his state-controlled economic policy and embrace a free market approach. This ended up being a fantastic choice. Spain saw a huge period of economic growth and rising living standards in the 1960s and became the world's second fastest growing economy after Japan. This softening occurred on just about everything. In 1956, he peacefully ceded Spanish territory to newly independent Morocco. Franco rolled back bans on Basque and Catalan language use, although they were still officially discouraged. And by 1962, hundreds of books were being published in Catalan again. His restrictions of women's working rights also gradually fell away after 1963, as did his massive censorship regime and his restrictions on protests and labor strikes. Things were not completely free. Criticism of Franco was still controlled, and there was little freedom to organize politically. But the harshest days of Francoist suppression were over. In 1966, he held another referendum where he submitted to some limits on his powers and set up a separate office of Prime Minister to run day-to-day affairs, an office that Franco immediately assumed. Eventually, the aging Franco stepped aside. In 1973, he stepped down as Prime Minister while staying on as head of state with a dwindling role. He finally died after a series of heart attacks on November 20th, 1975, bringing to a close one of the most complex and controversial regimes of the 20th century. Franco's death caused a mixed reaction. He never enjoyed the sort of cult of personality that Hitler or Mussolini had, but his softening in his later years also tempered hostility to him. After his death, the new king, Juan Carlos, quickly re-established a democracy. As part of this transition, the left and right wings agreed to a pact of forgetting, where everyone would agree to bury the crimes and controversies of Franco and the Civil War, and simply move on. Franco's legacy will always be complicated. The Republicans of the Spanish Civil War are still heavily romanticized by the political left across the world, while Franco's regime still has admirers in many right-wing movements today. So it is hard to come to an unbiased view. Spain itself has been reluctant to dig too deeply into the legacy Franco left behind. Many see him as a tyrant who murdered thousands and imprisoned his opponents while cruelly suppressing groups that he disliked. Historians estimate that he killed up to 200,000 people through warfare, imprisonment, or execution, although some estimates are closer to 100,000. Still, many see him as a hero who saved the country from anti-Catholic communist revolutionaries. They credit him for Spain's incredible economic boom in the 1960s, which improved the lives of millions, and point out his gradual reduction in power as time went on as proof that he wasn't a power-hungry dictator. Franco certainly killed people, including civilians. His critics say that's proof enough of his evil deeds, but his defenders argue that they were justified, and are no different to what the Allies did in the Second World War. Franco never did surrender Jews to the Nazis, but his critics rightly point out that he did consider it and then tried to cover it up. And should his legacy really be defined by the harsher oppression of his early years? Or do we ignore that for the softer stance of his later ones? There are no simple answers to any of it, and Franco remains one of the most complicated and divisive figures of the 20th century. Head to the comments below and let us know what you think about Franco and his legacy. While you're down there, don't forget to check out the download link for Rise of Kingdoms. Don't forget to use the promo code GREECE4ROK to give you a boost on your rise to glory, and follow the second link to join in on the exciting multi-civilization events going on in-game. Another huge thank you to Rise of Kingdoms for sponsoring this video.